All right, folks, so today we're talking about the Southern arguments for slavery. So we talked about how the slave owners responded to rebellions, the gag rule, post office rule, whatever else. So today what we're talking about is how Southerners responded to slavery, or rather how they argued for slavery. So the first argument made by Southern slave owners was that slavery was a positive good. The argument made was that slavery was a positive good. Slavery was a positive good. And what that meant was that these slaves benefited from being slaves because we Christianized and civilized them. So you know what? You may not like slavery, but you know what I provided them? Salvation for their soul. So what's a few extra years of free labor for me? I'm saving them. You know, without me, they'd be living back in Africa and they wouldn't have tools. They wouldn't have, these great inventions. So I civilized them. I gave them Christianity. So don't look at me and judge me. I don't see you saving black people. Yeah, there might be a little bit of slavery, but, shouldn't I be compensated for my time and effort? And so they said slavery is good because we've civilized and Christianized them. The other argument being made was that Africans were a childlike race. Africans were a childlike race, which meant if we let these Africans by themselves, what would happen?
They wouldn't be able to take care of themselves.
Yeah, they'd act like kids. They wouldn't be able to take care of themselves. And so, we're here to help them. If we left them be Africans and not enslave them, they being African, they might die. We're trying to save them. They need to be enslaved because they need structure and they need rules because they're children. They're stupid. They need our slave system. If we don't give them a slave system, they might as well be dead because they can't take care of themselves. The third argument that the Southerners made was that there was biblical support for slavery. There was biblical support for slavery. In the Bible, aren't we all slaves to the master God? Don't we all have masters and don't we all have slaves? And so just as God is the master, we too are the masters of those slaves. And this is just the way an ordered society works according to the Bible. Amen. And that might be the argument that the Southerners would make. They also argued that slavery was better than working in the factories in the North. They said, hey, you know what? Slavery might sound bad to you, but hey, at least my slaves get to work outside in the sun, in the open air, in the fields, with that cool breeze coming in. Whereas in the North, your paid workers that get paid so little are forced to work in these small, cramped factories that are dangerous and hot. I choose being a slave any day to be working and then working in one of those factories in the North is one of the arguments that they made. But the last argument was pretty simple, folks. They say, if you don't care about any of this morality, if you don't care about the ethics of slavery, then you know what else? Slavery is important, or we need slavery because cotton is king. That's why we need it more than anything else. Cotton is king. You need slavery. You need it. So if you're going to go around and complain about slavery, guess what? The reality is you need it. You need slaves to make your clothes. You need slaves to provide materials for your textile factories. So you can complain all you want. But the bottom line is that you need slavery because cotton is king. So those are the Southern arguments for slavery. There's some moral arguments in there, but ultimately, if you get past all of that, the bottom line is you need slavery in order for your economy to survive. Then there are Northern arguments against slavery. Then there are the Northern arguments against slavery. And the Northern arguments against slavery were simple enough. Number one, slavery was immoral. It's an easy argument to make. Slavery was immoral. It was an unjust system, of course. Number two, it betrayed the Constitution. It betrayed the Constitution. This idea of slavery in our government, it betrayed our Constitution. We're not supposed to have slaves in this kind of country. We have democracy. Yes.
What does that guy have on?
We'll get to that. Number one, it's immoral. Immoral. 2 M's. Immoral. Number two, it betrayed the Constitution. But 3, it ruined America's image as. And folks, I want you to think back to Unit 1 in 1630. What did John Winthrop want America to become?
A power?
Not a power. He specifically said that when he founded Massachusetts, he wanted Massachusetts in 1630. John Winthrop wanted Massachusetts to become this perfect society. What did he want it to become? A city upon a hill. He said it ruined our image as a city upon a hill. It ruined our image as a city upon a hill. Because what did it mean to be a city upon a hill? We were a shining example to the world, right? We were supposed to be the best example of what was possible. And can we be that shining example? Can we be that city upon a hill if our society thrives on the enslavement of people? No, so you're ruining it. We're supposed to be a city on a hill, but we can't be that if you suggest that our prosperity is not derived from faith, but derived from the enslavement of the black man. No. You're ruining it for everyone. So, those are the northern arguments against slavery. Now, the question asked is, what are these devices around their necks? Primarily, they're trying to prevent people from running away. One, they might put bells on it, so if someone was running away, they might hear them running because the bells are there. But two, if you have these around your necks, is it going to be easy for you to run away? No, you might get caught if you're running through a forest. You might get caught on a door, through a fence, whatever else. The idea was to make it very difficult for you to navigate as you run away. And if I'm trying to lasso you with a rope, I have multiple ways to be able to catch you. If I can just grab the bar also, it just makes it easier for you to get caught. And so this is just one example of a system of trying to prevent runaway slaves. Okay? Talk about the abolition movements then. We've talked about this briefly already, but I want to make sure we go into a little bit more detail and just go over these facts one more time, because yes, they were in the last unit, but they will also be in this unit. The facts that you should know include, again, abolition movements, the American Colonization Society. What did they want to do with slaves? Send them back to Africa. So under the American Colonization Society, just remember this is the Back to Africa movement. This is the Back to Africa movement. And where were they going to send them to? Liberia. Send them to Liberia. The Back to Africa movement. Was this successful? No, it failed because why?
No money.
No money, and?
They didn't want to get rid of their slaves.
They didn't want to go, and they didn't want to give up their slaves either. So for all those reasons, this Back to Africa movement fails. Amanda?
How do you spell Siberia?
Liberia.
Liberia.
Right there. Liberia. Like liberty, but T-Y at the end. Yes?
Do they still have those coins? Like, those coins are
Those coins still exist if you can find them. They're collector's coins.
like expensive?
Very much so. Rare. The other society you should know, which you already should know, is the American Anti-Slavery Society, founded by this man, William, what's his name? Lloyd Garrison. And he also wrote The Liberator. So the American Anti-Slavery Society, founded by William Lloyd Garrison, that also published The Liberator, believed in the immediate emancipation of slaves. They believed in the immediate emancipation of slaves, or the immediate abolition of slavery. He believed in the immediate abolition of slavery. He fought for the immediate abolition of slavery. Questions there? No? We should already know this guy. Someone kind of new, Frederick Douglass. You should also know Frederick Douglass, who was a runaway slave. He wrote Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, which was a story about his life as a slave. And he also published the North Star, which was an abolitionist newspaper. So again, he wrote Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, which was about his life as a slave, and he published the North Star, which was an abolitionist newspaper. He believed in abolition through politics. Well, he believed in a political solution to abolition, however you want to phrase that. But he believed in a political solution to abolition. Pretty much he wanted to pass laws to eliminate slavery. So he believed in a political solution to abolition. He believed in a political solution to abolition. The other person you should know, though, is David Walker. David Walker, also an abolitionist, but he wanted abolition, and he was willing to support violence if necessary. So he was a person who believed in a violent solution to abolition, if necessary. If the slave owners will give them up without a fight, sure. But he advocated a violent solution to abolition. If we have to kill some people, let's do that. That's David Walker. Sojourner Truth, you know her as well already. She gave that very famous speech at Seneca Falls. What was the speech? Ain't I a woman? Very good. So she gave the speech, Ain't I a woman? She's also an abolitionist. Sojourner Truth gave the speech, Ain't I a Woman, at Seneca Falls. And the last black abolitionist you should know for your purposes is Harriet Tubman. You know Harriet Tubman, Underground Railroad. Easy enough. Let's talk about abolitionist authors. Let's talk about abolitionist authors then. People who wrote books that opposed slavery. Let's talk about abolition authors, abolitionist authors. First person you guys should know is Theodore Dwight Weld, who wrote a book called American Slavery as It Is. American Slavery as It Is. Written by Theodore Dwight Weld. And Theodore Dwight Weld's book, American Slavery as It Is, these were testimonies about the horrors of slavery. These were testimonies about the horrors of slavery. Okay, so I have 4 excerpts for you from his book, American Slavery as It Is, just so you guys have an idea of what slavery might have been like from people's own accounts. Here we go. The slaves are terribly lacerated with whips and paddles. Red pepper and salt are rubbed into their mangled flesh. Hot brine and serpentine are poured into their gashes, and innumerable other tortures inflicted upon them. So if once they're whipped so much that their skin bursts open, they then pour salt into their exposed wounds to make sure that that pain is even more unbearable, including red pepper on exposed flesh. Another. In 1829 or 1830, one of my father's slaves was accused of taking the key to the office and stealing $4 or $5. He denied it. A constable or police officer by the name of Hull was called. He took the Negro, very deliberately tied his hands, and whipped till the blood ran freely down his legs. By this time, Hill appeared tired and stopped. He then took a rope, put a slip noose around his neck, and told the Negro he was going to kill him. At the same time, drew the rope and began whipping. The Negro fell. His cheeks looked as though they were to burst with strangulation. Hull whipped and kicked him till I really thought he was going to kill him. When he ceased, the Negro was in a complete gore of blood from head to foot. Last one. While a resident of Southampton County, Virginia, I knew two men, after having been severely treated, endeavor to make their escape. In this they failed, were taken, tied to trees, and whipped to death by their overseer. I lived a mile from the Negro quarters, and at this distance could frequently hear the screams of the poor creatures when beaten, and also hear the blows given by the overseer with some heavy instrument. And so these are just the accounts of what slavery was like at that time. Another book you should know, and this is the one you definitely should know, so put a star next to this one, is Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This is the most important book that typically comes up, because what this book did is that it convinced undecided Americans who were on the fence about slavery to become abolitionists. Many Americans that didn't have an opinion on slavery yet because they hadn't decided if it was wrong or right, or none of their business, they read Uncle Tom's Cabin, and these undecided Americans became abolitionists. This book became a bestseller, selling over 300,000 copies, which is a lot back then, when you think about it. Sold over 300,000 copies. And this book was also important because it convinced England and France not to support the South during the Civil War. Because England and France thought about it. Because does England need the South? Yeah, they need their cotton. And so England seriously considered supporting the South during the Civil War. But ultimately, England and France's public, they read Uncle Tom's Cabin. They said, no, we can't support slavery in America. That system is terrible. And so Uncle Tom's Cabin has been credited for convincing the English and the French not to support the South during the Civil War. Because if they did, would America have won that war? Would the North have won that war? Not at all. Last book, The Impending Crisis of the South by Hinton R. Helper. No relation to Hamburger Helper. People assume they're related. They're not. One's not real. Hinton R. Helper wrote that the ones most hurt by slavery was who? Not the slaves. He said the ones most hurt by slavery were poor Southern whites. Why might poor Southern whites be affected by slavery the most? No jobs available. And as a poor farmer, can I compete with the big plantations with free labor? No. So even if I tried to compete, would I be able to realistically? No. So they said those hurt most by slavery are not the slaves, but us hardworking Americans that can't even compete with these large plantations. We're the ones who are suffering. It's the common people that are suffering, not the poor blacks. Some of them eat better than we do. We are the ones that suffer. And he also said the Southern economy also suffered. Because of slavery, what did the Southern economy not do? Because of slavery, what did the Southern economy do? It did grow, but it didn't develop in what way? It did not industrialize. It prevented industrialization. And why, according to the Southern poor whites, is this bad? Why might poor white Southerners like the idea of industrialization? It creates jobs. Lots of jobs. Lots and lots of jobs. So they said, because of this over-reliance on cotton, we as poor Southern whites are suffering. Continue to study for your test, folks. We'll continue this conversation about slavery Next time we see each other. See you later.